All right, welcome everybody to the first live edition of the Well-Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohls. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our panelist discussion on college student mental health during the pandemic. I've asked three clinicians here that serve our college campus at Bethany Lutheran College in the counseling center to join me this evening to really focus in on answering some questions and having some good discussion around things that college students can be doing to practice wellness and improve their mental well-being. So my panelists tonight are Deneal Sperle. She is a licensed professional counselor. All of our counselors are from Christian Family Solutions. She's been practicing counseling for the past couple of years here in southern Minnesota. She works with college-age students and does a lot of work with trauma, anxiety, and depression issues. I'm also joined by Joe Lundsten, a professional counselor serving here at Bethany Lutheran College and also Martin Luther College over in New Ulm. He enjoys working with young adults on issues related to family dynamics, depression, anxiety, phase of life issues. And then our last panelist is Ashley Guthmiller. She is finishing up her master's degree in clinical mental health counseling here in Mankato at Minnesota State University. She's been interning with Christian Family Solutions and serving the college campus here, as well as doing outpatient counseling work. So I'm really excited to have them with us tonight. And I've got a whole list of questions here that have been submitted ahead of time. So thank you to all of the listeners that sent those in to me ahead of time. We're also going to be taking some live questions tonight. So I want to be able to use the Q&A function in our webinar. So you can submit your questions through that Q&A function, and that'll show directly to me, and I'll try and work those into our show this evening. So feel free at any point to send in those questions, and I'll be taking those. So the other part, before we kind of dive into some of the discussion tonight, I want to allow Deneal Sperle to really talk about some of the opportunities that are coming up here at Bethany Lutheran College for students on this campus to be able to check in on their mental health. My hope is that a lot of college campuses are doing something like this. So reach out to your student counseling center at your campus if you're not here at Bethany to check into some of the potential opportunities you might have for screening or talking with a counselor just about where you're at in terms of your mental health. But I'm going to turn things over to Deneal here for just a little bit so she can talk about the mental health screenings that her and the team are going to be doing here at Bethany in the coming week. Deneal?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kohls. We are excited to partner with Bethany to offer free mental health screenings to the students at Bethany Lutheran College on February 1st and 2nd. On the 1st, it's from 4 to 6, and on the 2nd, it's from noon to 2 p.m. And a mental health screening is just basically allows practitioners and students to sit down together. There's some questionnaires that you fill out, and then you just talk about any concerns that the students have. So it's not meant to be diagnostic in any way, so the students can kind of do with the information what they want. If they want to make an appointment, and that's the recommendation of the practitioner, they can do that. Or we can also just give suggestions, based on what the screening turns out. But it's a good opportunity to just do a little mental health check-in, especially with all the stressors going on recently. And it's free. It takes about a half an hour. There's an assessment piece where students fill out a couple of questionnaires based around basically anxiety and depression symptoms. And then there's an interview portion too where they'll have a chance to talk to the practitioners about their results and get some suggestions.
So it's not just filling out a questionnaire
No.
and then getting a result back. I mean, there's plenty of inventories online that
Yep.
people can use to kind of check in on that. But this really takes it another step, it seems like, with getting to visit with a professional counselor and kind of talk about those results and kind of maybe where some of the areas that are doing well and some of the areas where there's some room for growth or need
Right.
for attention.
And if there are specific concerns, that aren't addressed in the questionnaire, or that come out that they want to ask specific questions to. You've got a practitioner there. So about half the time is spent filling out the questionnaire, and there's a little bit of intake paperwork, because to be able to work with people, we have to have their permission. But then there's also about half of it is spent just talking to the practitioner.
Okay. And then can you just give those dates and
Sure,
times
absolutely.
just one more time?
Yep, absolutely. And I think that this is up somewhere on Bethany's website too. But
sure, and I'll link that in the show notes.
Sure.
When I post this episode on the podcast, I'll have a link so that people that are listening can go directly to that and see those dates and times. And
there's posters outside our office at 207 Luther Hall, so you can also stop by our office as well. On Monday, February 1st from 4 to 6 p.m., and then Tuesday, February 2nd from 12 to 2 p.m. are the walk-in times. If those times don't work for you, though, you can call our 1-800 number and schedule a screener. You just have to say you're a Bethany student, you're interested in the screenings, but those times don't work for you, and we've got people that will help you get scheduled for a screening.
So you don't need an appointment if you're going to come in at one of these times.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
That's
but if it's
walk-in.
outside of these times, you could still do this screening process. You just have to call or go on the website.
Right. So that we can make sure we've got a practitioner there ready to go for you.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah. So we'll give that information a little bit later in the show, just to revisit as people are kind of popping in throughout our discussion this evening. But yeah, thank you for that. This is, again, I think drawing our attention during the pandemic to monitoring our wellness, paying attention to our mental health. So that's my hope with our conversation tonight, that people are able to listen, ask some questions, be reflective about this discussion, and then take other steps to take care of themselves, whether that's a screening or maybe whether that's doing some of the things that we talk about tonight. So that's awesome. All right, so let's dive into our first question for tonight. So I had a listener write in talking or asking some questions about time management and productivity. So the listener says, what techniques or advice would you give for students struggling with productivity and time management issues? Specifically, like, how can students shift their mindset from being overwhelmed by the tasks they have to complete and then find some contentment in their academic lives?
Yeah, maybe I could start. And certainly we all have different answers that we could give, but maybe just to give like more of a foundational answer and a start. I think a big thing to do would just have compassion on yourself as a start. And I say that because you're probably not the only one struggling. And I don't mean to invalidate your personal struggle, because I know students are really struggling, but I would say don't get caught up in the mindset that you're failing somehow because things aren't going the way you had planned for this year, or you're not getting the things done, or right, the idea of productivity, you're not feeling productive. And I think we can turn the circumstances of everything sort of being chaotic on ourselves as if we're the reason we're not getting things done. So I would say start with compassion for yourself and grace for yourself, and just be patient through this time period, which is really hard. Obviously, that's not easy to do, but I think it's a place to start. So that's maybe what I would say.
Yeah. So you're picking up here that the person's feeling like I'm not being productive or I'm not managing my time well, and that's kind of like a reflection on me as a person, and then becoming pretty overwhelmed by that. So I don't know, what about that overwhelming part? Like when a student is kind of like looking at this list of things that they have to do or deadlines that are approaching, and they're feeling kind of like panicked or overwhelmed. What kind of things are you typically talking through with people when they're expressing that?
I think it can be overwhelming when you're looking at a whole semester's worth of tasks and to-do lists, and I think starting small is a good thing to kind of get yourself going, break up assignments or work on assignments that you can accomplish, and start kind of peeling away at that one by one. And it's progress, not perfection, just working to slowly progress and kind of chip away. And have compassion for yourselves in those moments where you don't get everything done, or you want to get more done, but you don't have time, or you're starting to stress yourself out, kind of working away, chipping little by little.
I'm a big fan of chunking, is what I'll call it. And it's like, okay, so I've got like this much, and I either think about chunking in terms of volume or time. So like I'm going to do, I'm going to read these next 3 pages or something, or I'm going to work for the next 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And then in between each of those chunks, I'm going to give myself like a brief little break. I'm going to let myself be distracted. Maybe I'm going to be doodling, or I'm going to, walk around the room or go get a drink or a snack or something. And then I come back and I work on the next chunk. And it just your progress versus perfection comment kind of made me think of that's been a really effective tool for a lot of people just to get started, because it's like you're focused too much on the outcome when you're just saying, oh, I've got this huge list and how am I ever going to get this done?
Sometimes I even break lists into things I have to do today, things I wish, like these are, like this will make me feel productive, things I wish I could get done, or if I get this done, I can go to, and things that are long term so that I don't forget about them. But like kind of breaking it into even smaller pieces, I find can be helpful and more manageable. And then, that self-compassion part, setting time limits, I think can be helpful, because in a pre-COVID world, your productivity probably looked a lot different than it does now. So like having grace with yourself and understanding, like if I had my way, I would spend 2 hours on this assignment, but what I have is 4 things to do, and I have 2 hours before I normally go to bed. And so like maybe I'm not going to spend as much time as I would, but I'm going to feel better than tomorrow if I take care of myself and get the rest. So like learning to be okay with, instead of like the perfection, like this is what I have, and that's good enough for right now.
So that's kind of speaking to the contentment. I don't know, is that where you were going to go,
I
Joe?
was just going to maybe add just a little bit, just a thought that popped in my head. Just really try not to compare yourself to how someone else is doing. We can compare ourselves infinitely, but I think just find a way that works for you and be okay with that. But also don't forget to like give yourself space to fill yourself back up, because you can get all the things you need to get done and still be miserable at the end of it. So just making sure you're actually giving yourself time, I think.
Yeah. So there's like almost a myth there. Like if I get everything done, then I'll feel good. And that's, I think you just spoke to that's not the case, that we aren't filled up by necessarily this outcome that we somehow achieve or don't achieve. But if we can celebrate progress, we can, small victories, big victories, just affirm those. That's going to give us more energy and motivation moving forward, rather than the kind of self-criticism that you guys are talking about here.
And I can stay up all night and do this, but I think sometimes we don't consider like at what cost. Like, is that worth, are the benefits of that worth the cost in the long run?
Yeah. I won't ask you, but I'll self-disclose here. I'm thinking about when's the last time I pulled an all-nighter, and I think there was one time in my doc program that I did. I pulled an all-nighter and it was actually, I was like assistant teaching for a professor, and all this stuff needed to get graded, and I had no idea how much work it was actually going to be. Because if it was just an assignment for me, I would have probably been like, oh, that's good enough. But because I was doing it for somebody else, I was like, no, I have to. And I pulled, and that was like, it was like 5 a.m. and I'm like, I'm never doing this again. Never. Like, I will just deal with whatever happens. And we'll talk about sleep a little bit later, because there are some questions about that as well. And I think sleep is such a relevant college student issue, young adult issue, even outside of the pandemic. But before we move on from this, I had found an article on bestcolleges.com. And it was just a really brief article, but the journalist interviewed a college freshman about her experience this year. So she's coming into college, first year, right in the middle of a pandemic. And she was like, I know that things aren't going to be normal. I know that it's not going to be the typical college experience. But she talked about how she has these two extremes in her day. On the one hand, she can be completely bored and isolated, just like nothing to do, and kind of saying, there's not a lot going on campus, or at least as much as there would be without COVID, without these restrictions. And then community activities are just super limited as well. And then spending a lot of time alone. But then on the other hand, she can be, like this first question, totally stressed and overwhelmed, because she talks about feeling disconnected from her professors and her peers, struggling with like financial stressors and just dealing with an online learning environment, so much time on the computer. So what guidance would you give to a student that may be kind of bouncing back and forth? Maybe they're not just in the state of like being overwhelmed, but they're also like totally bored and really struggling with figuring out how to structure their time or use it meaningfully. You can be thoughtful about it. We're just talking, so that's fine.
That sort of reminds me of like trauma, like where somebody experiences trauma and they can kind of bounce back and forth between being hyper aroused and hypo aroused. So what you're kind of looking for is that balance, I think, and that's what she's kind of struggling with. And as you were reading that, the first thing that kind of popped into my head was grief, right? Like your freshman year or sophomore year or senior year of college is probably not looking the way you thought it was. Like if you were a junior last year going into your senior year, you were probably thinking, whew, this isn't my senior year, but now it's like still lasting. And I don't know about you guys, but I've had to do a lot of grief processing with people because we don't like always recognize this as grieving, like that lost year. But I think that is important to kind of recognize this is what I'm feeling and give yourself some space for that.
Yeah, I wondered, the journalist or the person kind of responding to these questions was using words like bored and lonely, but I wondered about, like grief or like just feeling empty. Like I don't have this like clear direction, or I don't have this clear connection with things. And I don't know, what have your guys' experiences been in working on the college campus with dealing with loss, dealing with, well, my expectations were this, but reality is this.
I mean, that's exactly what I was going to get at, is the expectations versus reality. Coming in freshman year, you have such high expectations, and you probably hear about it from friends and family members of what to expect, or even professors, teachers. And then to have it just be nothing like that, it's shocking. It's coming into a place, maybe you don't know anyone, have no connections, and it's hard to make those connections when you're not having the resources to do so anymore. And just managing that, and try as you might, there's still a lot of barriers there.
Yeah, I think about just FOMO, like fear of missing out. I think the world's sort of just, we've been forced to just be in a state of FOMO. And so, yeah, just to build off that, just really focus on finding that balance and finding just the little nuggets that you can take in the day that were good. And really, this isn't easy, and we're all, I think all of us here struggle with these exact things. So I think that's important to say, but just being able to shift your mindset of like, okay, this is where I'm at now. This isn't where I will always be, God willing, of course. But how can I make where I am the best I can for this year or this semester? And certainly, it's a harder task than it seems. But I think if you can kind of keep your focus on that sort of mindset, I think can be helpful again. And that's like a foundational thing, I suppose. It's not like a what can I do? What kind of things can I do? But I think you can start there, and that certainly makes things more helpful.
Yeah. So we have a live question that kind of piggybacks on that. So the question is, how do we get out of that bad pattern of negative thinking? Strategy for this, a way of really like shifting that mindset. So we know, okay, that's important. Our perspective is important, how we're viewing things, but we get kind of caught up in this negative cycle that kind of feeds back in on itself. So what tools or strategies are you guys kind of walking students through when they're dealing with that?
Awareness is obviously the first most important piece. If you're not aware that you're in this cycle, it's hard to stop it. So becoming aware that, hey, this is happening, these are the thoughts that I'm having, and it's unproductive, it's unhealthy for me, that in itself is like a good way to start implementing positivity, is just knowing that it has to start.
I do two things, and they seem kind of opposites, but I think both are important. So one of them is like specifically name your feeling and be honest about it. Sometimes I think as Christians, and it's not a bad thing, but we think we always have to be positive. Otherwise we're disappointing people or we're not living our faith. But the truth is life is hard sometimes. And so like acknowledging that and giving yourself some space to be sad about things that are sad, like a senior year that's not what you expect it to be, I think is really important. So like naming what you're actually feeling and giving yourself some space. But then I like radical acceptance from DBT. So the idea that it may not be what I would choose and I may not like it, but this is the reality in front of me. So at some point then I have to kind of accept this reality and move forward. And you can think about like ways to reclaim. With trauma, you look at like reclaiming pieces of your life that trauma has changed. Like in what ways can you reclaim kind of the social engagement? So it may not look the way you wanted it to, but like, can you have one friend over in a mask? You know, if those are the college rules, can you have one friend in your dorm room in a mask so you can play Uno together for half an hour? Like that's something.
That, a recent guest on the podcast was talking about how so much of our dialogue has been dominated by what we're told no about, right? All of the things that were being said, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that. And that like at some point, all of us have that little adolescent still that just kind of wants to be like, I don't want to listen. I'm not going to do that. So the guest was really talking about how can we get to yes, and what can we say yes to, and so typically when I'm seeing somebody and they're kind of in that negative tunnel vision or just that circular negative pattern, part of getting out of that is stepping back and not just focusing on the no's, but also trying to see the yeses. What can I do? What do I have control over in this situation? Because I think it's going to elevate all of our anxiety when we're just focused on these things that we don't have control over and kind of dwelling on that. I don't know, do you guys have other thoughts on that? Kind of shifting away from the negative mindset?
I would say maybe be really conscious of what you're consuming, maybe. Whether it be social media or any other thing that you're taking in. Obviously that doesn't always have to be a factor, but I think it plays a big role in keeping us, and that's kind of building off what you said, right? It can keep us in that negative mindset, and we can get very stuck in that when we're consuming things that we're not really taking account of necessarily, whether it be social media or, Netflix or what we're reading or what we're doing with our time as well. So I think that's important to just keep in mind.
Yeah.
Just again, take an outside view of kind of where you're at with things, and not be critical of yourself, but just kind of work towards understanding in that way.
So let's pause there. Let's go into that. There was another listener question that was submitted actually about social media, and I think this is a good place to address that. So as a society, we can see both the benefits and the downsides of social media. What's your personal philosophy on social media use, and what would be your advice to students struggling with toxicity, negativity on social media, especially in the midst of the pandemic, where I think people are spending more time there trying to connect, but yeah, it's a lot of negativity. So I guess, first of all, just what's your personal philosophy on social media? That's the first question.
I don't know. I think there's pros and cons, and you're going to be able to find in your world both pros and cons.
Yeah.
Pros in this world we live in right now is the connection piece. We're able to connect with one another easier. Con is it can be toxic, it can be consuming, it can create this perception of how you're supposed to be doing, what you're supposed to be doing, how you're supposed to be living. And I would just say be mindful of what you're consuming, how much. If it's mindless, are you mindlessly doing that? And how could you better fill that time if it is mindless? And just keeping that like something that you're trying to monitor for yourself.
Mm-hmm. I love that idea of using social media with intention, right? That it's so easy to just pull out the phone and just scroll through Instagram and see, and then, you're faced with whatever pops up, right? You don't have any control over what other people are posting or what's kind of going on in their lives, or, bigger platforms that you might be following, what their kind of gripe of the day might be. But if you go on with intention, like, I'm going to message this person or I'm going to post about this thing, going on with intent is a way of reclaiming some of that control in that environment. Other thoughts on like personal philosophies on social media?
I don't know. I'm kind of a Scrooge when it comes to social media. So
well, that's honest.
Maybe I shouldn't say anything, but
Go for it.
Yeah. It's tough. I think maybe one thing I'll say is kind of off that idea of it's not a passive thing, and so I think we oftentimes like, I need a break, so I'm just gonna scroll for a little bit, or I'm just gonna look at this thing. And while it feels passive, it's not. Like, things are happening in your brain, and it's shaping how you see yourself and how you see the world. And it doesn't do the same thing for you chemically that something that's actually beneficial for you does. And again, I don't want to just rag on social media. I'm not a huge fan. I try to stay very far away. But I'm not.
You had
I'm not
full
saying,
disclosure. You're a Scrooge about it. That's
I'm not
okay.
saying everyone has to do that. But I think
Yeah.
and certainly what Ashley said, there's pros and cons. But I think, like, ask yourself what you would really lose if you just kind of shut off for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
How would it actually impact you? And does social media really give you what you think it gives you?
Mm-hmm.
Does it really benefit you more than it takes away from you? I think.
Yeah.
But really, just sit down. It's not a passive thing like we thought it is. And I think that documentary, what was it?
On Netflix,
The Social Dilemma,
yeah,
right? I think
Social
that
Dilemma.
was eye-opening for a lot of people. And so don't want anybody to be scared, but just be
But the bots
thoughtful.
are out there. Yeah. No.
Be thoughtful about it.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think it's a tool that can be used. One of the books that I really like to use with clients is on resiliency, and one of the charts on there has you kind of evaluate, are you using social media to connect? Because that's what it's supposed to be for, right, is to make connections and keep connections. Are you actually using it to connect, or is it actually isolating you? So you kind of step back and evaluate like the different pieces of it. Like, are you actually using the tool the way you want it to, or is it starting to use you a little bit? So
Yeah. Can I share a quick story? So I'm not on a ton of social media, but I do have Instagram, and I enjoy that, and it's been just a positive way for me to connect with people that I don't live close to anymore, and just stay in contact. And but during the lead up through the election cycle and voting, I got invited through Instagram to participate in a research study, and I checked it out. It was legit, and it's actually a research organization that I've actually consumed some of their research. It's good stuff. And so I was like, yep, I'm going to do this. And part of being a participant was not just answering questions and filling out surveys, but they actually deactivated my Instagram account. And I went either in a hopper of 1 week or 4 weeks. And I was really kind of hoping for the 4-week hopper because they were paying me $25 a week to have my account deactivated. But I ended up in the 1-week hopper, and that was fine. And like one day, it was just random. It was like on a Tuesday afternoon. I went on to go on Instagram, and it was like, I was logged out. I was like, oh, it started now. Okay. So I went the whole week, no Instagram. I didn't, turn it back on or anything like that. But what I found was that when I got access back, I made a decision. I wasn't going to have it, first of all, on my home screen on my phone. I just put it down like in the apps below. So I actually have to like search for it, go to it to access it. So it's not just turn on my phone in one click. And I have dramatically decreased my time on Instagram. Not that I was spending a ton, but it's noticeable like how much time just by hiding it on my phone and not having it right there. So I think that was just something that was pretty eye-opening for me, because I think it had in some ways turned into that mindless scrolling or kind of filling time. And that kind of initial purge of like, I'm not doing it at all for a week, and then coming back to it with boundaries is something that then I've tried to implement with some students and clients as well. Is like, why don't you just stop and see what it feels like? Like, just don't use it for a week. And then when you come back to it, you get to decide what those boundaries are. So that's my personal philosophy. That's how I've approached it. All right. So let's change gears a little bit. Here's a very mental health focused question that was submitted by a listener. And the question starts this way: how much of our mental health is predestined? Individual says, I'm someone who struggles with bouts of depression, but I take a lot of steps to improve my mental health. I exercise regularly. That's fantastic. I try to sleep at least 7 hours a night. That's great too. Eat well, take vitamins and supplements to fill in the cracks that I miss with my macronutrients. I've also experimented with meditation and try to pray often, but despite all my efforts, there are still times when I struggle or have bouts of depression. So let's talk a little bit about, is our mental health predestined? Is that just something that's like hardwired into us from the get-go? Let's start there, and then we can talk a little bit about approaches to managing and coping with depression. So what are your guys' thoughts on this?
Not to be a Midwestern, but hoofda.
Yeah.
It's that nature versus nurture thought, and that's a tough conversation to have because there's no true answer almost. It's individualized. It's unique to everyone, and your experiences with it is going to look different to someone else. You could be doing all the quote unquote right things and none of them be working, and there's not a good answer for why.
Yeah, so this nature versus nurture, let's go with that a little bit, because I think our mental health has some biological components to it, whether it's depression or ADHD, autism, a bipolar disorder. Like, all of these have some biological underpinnings to it. That's why they respond to medication. But I don't think that's the whole story. I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts when it comes to maybe the nurture part with our mental health?
Yes, I'm going to be thinking out loud here, so this isn't going to be a fully constructed.
Let's do it. Think out loud. I love it.
A fully constructed answer. Again, what Ashley said. It's so complex, right? It was a question that people were fighting and wrestling with. It's nature, it's nurture, and it's like actually it's both. And it's a very complex thing. Sometimes more favoring nature, and sometimes more favoring nurture. Like you said, with some of those mental health diagnoses that seem to be driven more by biology, sometimes it can be, it can be things that are outside of biology that activate them, like trauma or stress or something like that. And maybe whereas if they hadn't experienced those things, they wouldn't have experienced the biological effects. And so, right, but that's just some of the time. Sometimes people experience depression because of loss, or because, maybe experience depression because of COVID, right? And the depression that brings, and then it subsides after things have been worked through and things have changed. But then certainly you get some people who it just comes, right? And I would say to this person, not that I'm assuming that they feel guilt, but again, and I'll sound like a broken record, but to have the compassion on yourself to say, I'm doing all these things and my life's a certain way, so I shouldn't feel depressed. I hear that a lot. And, I'm not making a comparison necessarily. It's just an example. But in the same vein of someone who maybe was born, without an arm, or who had lost an arm, I would never want that person to feel like they have it's a internal thing that has become wrong with them, or something that they added to, or certainly, obviously that's a whole nother conversation. But so I don't know if that makes sense. I'll stop there because the thought is sort of ended, and I don't want to just ramble.
That's okay.
But
that's okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to pick up that train, Deneal?
Well, not that train.
No, okay. Go
It was a good train. I think Joe did a great job by himself. I would, you mentioned the word predestination, and I think we can be predisposed to certain mental health, physical health issues. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get them, or that God, that's what he wants for our life, or he's punishing us. That's not really the case, but we certainly genetically can be predisposed to certain things. That doesn't mean that we can't work on them, it sounds like this person is doing. I think of introversion and extroversion. I'm an introvert, and I appreciate being around friends. I'm a social person, but the truth is I'm never going to get my batteries recharged by being around big groups of people. Yeah. It's just not who I am. So kind of accepting that piece of myself, that this is just part of who I am, and figuring out ways to embrace that while figuring out how to be with my friends and be social in ways that are comfortable for me, I think are important. But also you kind of got to give yourself some space to this is a sad world and depression is going to happen to sincere, good Christians sometimes too. So I think we can carry some guilt about that. But if you look historically through the heroes of faith, you hear depression, right? So
certainly with Elijah, certainly with Paul.
Even David, when Saul is pursuing him in the Psalms, you hear him crying out to the Lord, and there's some depression there. So that doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just means maybe it's a hard time in your life too.
I think so. My initial thought was, I wonder what things would be like if this person wasn't doing those activities and really being very intentional with taking care of themselves. I think, how much worse things might be. So it's not that it's not doing anything, but it probably is doing quite a bit to benefit. And I noticed that a lot of them are very physically based, right? It's very action oriented. And I love that too, because I think when we're doing, that helps activate, motivation and energy and kind of mobilizes us. But just kind of circling back to mindset too, I think is important. And one of the things that happens with depression is that we end up feeling some feelings of hopelessness. We're kind of looking to the future or looking to the present, and not really seeing much good. And so I often find that we have to be very intentional with creating space to focus on the positive. And one of the ways that I love to do that is through gratitude. And I'll say, okay, let's just start with basic gratitude list. Let's put one or two things that you're grateful for today, to kind of, again, gradually shift that focus out of kind of that depressive thinking and into a space that's, maybe going to help balance that out a little bit. It's not that gratitude is an antidote, but gratitude, when we're in states of gratitude, that also has a biological impact on our brain chemistry as well. So I think there's a lot of good that can come out of that. I think this person's doing a lot of the right things. Have some self-compassion, be patient, understand that, we're living in a fallen world and in fallen bodies. And so nature, nurture, all of that's going to impact us. But keep working hard.
Well, and praise, right? So as a Christian, like, happiness can be fleeting, but God is God and his characteristics don't change, and there's always reason like there to I can always praise, and I think that changes mindset too, along with gratitude.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so all right, let's talk a little bit about some stress here. So there's a concern with increased use of denial or disengagement behaviors to cope with stress during the pandemic. So what adaptive or like functional coping skills do you guys recommend students use to positively impact their mental wellness? So I think some of I'm just expanding on this a little bit, like disengagement or denial. Sometimes that can turn into like I'm seeking something to make me feel better in this moment, maybe take my mind off of the things that I'm stressed about. Sometimes that can be alcohol, sometimes that can be substances, sometimes that can be gaming or streaming services or those kind of things. So that really just leads to avoidance and disengagement. So when you see a student kind of struggling with some of those patterns of behavior, what are some of the ways that you're trying to guide them into more adaptive coping to deal with that stress?
Well, it's going to sound stupid and simple, but just to have them re-engage themselves in their own bodies and with others, I would say.
Talk about how to do that. How do you re-engage with your body?
I think you have to be intentional about it. You have to, I think the biggest thing is to take the time to do it. It's hard to just stop and say, like, where am I at? And our brains are very good at doing that, right? That we're very good at, like, finding something that helps us cope, and then we just do that. And we totally forget about ourselves. So, right? You might be really stressed and you don't even realize it, and the first thing you do is just go to some sort of substance or any other thing, fill in the blank. And so kind of breaking that cycle a little bit by just checking in with yourself and be like, where am I at? How am I actually feeling? But then starting to, again, re-engage with your body. Like, and it sounds so stupid, but just to focus on your breathing, like how big that can be. And there's a whole lot of research on what breathing can do and things like that. Meditation, I heard, right? Prayer, relaxation, things of any kind. We could give thousands of examples. So that's not maybe the most helpful to just talk about necessarily, but and I would say engage with others. And I know it's hard when we want to step back and disengage from people, when we want to isolate, but I think we kind of got to work and force ourselves sometimes to be out. And that mindset slowly changes, I think. But
that makes me just think of, like, sometimes you say, I'm just going to do this for 20 minutes. So maybe it's going to talk to a friend or meet up with somebody or, go down to the cafe and, have dinner with somebody. Like, I'm just going to go for 20 minutes. And if I'm not feeling better after 20 minutes or I'm not feeling like I want to stay there, okay, then I leave. But at least I tried. I did something in that instance that was intentional rather than, I'll use the word reflexive. Like, I think that's what you were talking about, is like we just do these things automatically without even really checking in or thinking about ourselves. And so, I love that. What other kinds of more adaptive coping skills are you helping guide students toward to manage their stress?
I mean, I was completely along the same lines of when you're wanting to disengage and isolate and go to unhealthy coping mechanisms just to kind of fight that urge and to be aware of it, that it's happening, and fight it and do the opposite of what you want to isolate. Try and force yourself to do the opposite of that and reach out to people and ask for that help, even if it's not directly saying, hey, I need help. Say, hey, you want to go grab a coffee, and fighting that urge to isolate.
I also try and encourage students, instead of taking like a judgmental stance, to try and like have some curiosity about like, why am I having trouble engaging? Like, if you can be curious about that instead of judgmental, that often leads to better results, because, if you think about people that you open up to, they're usually non-judgmental people. So being curious about why you're reacting the way you're reacting can be helpful. And yeah, those check-ins I think are really important. Like even as a therapist, like at the end, like we kind of have hour blocks. So at the end of each, I've gotten used to kind of checking in, like if my anxiety's high, even if I'm going to be a couple minutes late for an appointment, maybe I get up and walk through the office and get a glass of water, because I know that that's what I need to just kind of reset. So those frequent check-ins with yourself and taking care of yourself, because if you keep pushing, you get to 7 or 8 o'clock at night and you don't have infinite amount of coping. Like if you've used all of it up and then it's 7 o'clock and you've got this huge paper to write, you've got nothing left for it. So by taking smaller breaks and taking care of yourself throughout the day, that can make a huge difference in kind of your stamina too.
Yeah.
And I would say just quick, because I could hear people maybe who are listening, if there's anybody out there listening, just like,
we've got a good audience.
We want to engage with people, but we can't because of everything going on. So I totally get that, and it's not right now. It's not as easy to just say, well, yeah, just go hang out with people, or go meet up with someone. And so I get that, and it's hard for all of us. Again, right? Just like Deneal said, we have to do the same things as counselors. We're humans too, and it happens, but. I think that's where technology can be beneficial, like when used in a correct way. Like, maybe call someone you haven't called in a while, or actually really Skype with someone. I know people do that a lot. So, and it's not the same as being in person. So, again, just giving yourself the space to be like, it's not always going to be this way, but really finding ways I can fight the urge to disengage.
I've seen some really creative ways that people have used technology to connect and like actually do things together, and maybe that's even playing like old school like board games or card games like online, being able to do that. I think there's some good apps for that and platforms for that. I've also heard of virtual dinner parties where they have a recipe and everybody's connecting through their Zoom, and then they all make the same meal together, and they're kind of in their kitchen cooking and hanging out. But yeah, it's through Zoom, so you do miss that in person, but it's still coming together and joining in something that I think is meaningful. So I think there's lots of creative ways to try and still connect in spite of, again, just getting to yes, finding things that we can do rather than the things that we feel like we can't.
Yeah. You mentioned old school, like as a team, maybe you can't get together and have dinners like you used to, but like what I wonder what it would be like to like write a personal note with like an encouraging quote and just like send it in the like campus mail to everybody on the team. Like having a handwritten note, I don't know about you guys, but I keep those things. So like sometimes going old school can be even more encouraging,
and more meaningful.
Think of that, so like getting creative and like sending notes through campus mail to your friends, like, hey, thinking about you, like that can make the difference in somebody's day. And I think, you mentioned before that negative loop in one of the questions. I think, when you disengage and you're using avoidance, that definitely feeds into that kind of negative loop, because then you start thinking, I can't even engage with this. Wasn't in this class today. I didn't get the assignment done. Like that can really spiral very quickly. And then you disengage further because you think people are judging you. But the truth is everybody's struggling right now. And making the assumption that other people are going to judge you for not getting something done is probably not accurate. Like, a lot of people are understanding because they're struggling too. So
Totally.
Fighting those assumptions that feed into that negative loop, I think, can be productive too.
Okay. We're at 7:19, so we got about 11 minutes left. And there's another question I want to get to here from a listener. And this is actually kind of about student athletes. And that's not, again, that's a specific population of students on campus. But I think other people will be able to relate and connect with this. So the question starts this way. As we continue to push forward with athletics, many of our teams are COVID testing multiple times per week. And unfortunately, many have gone through plenty of shutdowns and subsequent startups due to COVID infections or close contacts, so quarantining when they are near a positive patient. So these situations, this back and forth, have been extremely mentally and physically taxing for everybody involved: athletes, coaches, medical staff, even administration. What are some coping strategies to help during these difficult times of like, oh, I get to do this, oh, no, I don't get to do this, right? This kind of back and forth that students are experiencing. So there's kind of two parts to this question, but we'll start there. Just, again, coping with that uncertainty and like thinking, oh, I'm going to get to do it, and then I can't. I think that extends beyond athletics. I know I experienced some of that. My boys have experienced some of that and in high school with their athletics. So I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on that? You can be thoughtful. Yeah, you can be thoughtful. That's fine.
Yeah, I get it. Well, I don't get it, but as an athlete myself, I would be pretty bummed. And we've said this a lot, and it doesn't seem like an answer that's going to be actually helpful. So I get like why this might sound frustrating, but really, again, shifting how you see that opportunity. Certainly college sports and sports in general. And the same could go with arts, right? I know that people in the arts are going through the same struggles, right? They're losing those opportunities as well. But I think all of those opportunities are not really givens, right? I think we've seen that this year, and I think we're as a modern society, we're very used to being able to just kind of do all those things and not even really think about it. We're blessed to have the time in our day to be able to give ourselves to those things. And again, when they're taken away, then it's like, well, this is like a need I have, and so to shift it from a need to sort of like, this is an opportunity that I have. And so if I look at it as an opportunity, it's not something that I've necessarily lost. That is something I need. And I would say for athletes or for people in the arts, whether you're doing studio art or you're in theater or you're doing music, to just not be focused on your identity in that singular way, because you're so much more than one thing that you do. And again, I don't want to devalue that, because the arts, sports are awesome and they bring a lot of meaning into our lives, but don't let yourself be stuck in this is all I do and this is all I am, because I think that can produce, well, now what do I have? And so, again, that's not like, okay, what's going to fix all the COVID procedures that we have to go to in the back and forth. But I think, again, if you can keep that mindset, I think it can be a little less impactful.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. So much more than being singularly defined by one thing. And again, those are beautiful things, and I love that you said that. So I'm going to let that sit. I think that's awesome, Joe. Other thoughts on, just coping with this back and forth?
I think kind of an earlier note that we made of focusing on what you can't do, switching that mindset to focus on what you can do. We have a lot of things right now that we can't control, and that's one of them. All of those procedures and quarantining and all of that, we really can't control that. And instead switching that mindset, what can I control in this situation? What can I do self-care wise to control in this situation, to manage that? That's kind of what comes to mind for me.
Yeah. The other part of this question then is, at what point do all these like intensive protocols just become like too much? And maybe it's in the best interest to just like pause and just say, we're not going to do this back and forth anymore. We're just going to stop and just wait, and I think we saw some of that like last year, early on during the pandemic, where things shut down and it was like, okay, that's just canceled. We're not even going to try and do that. But now, because I think this has been going on for so long, there's a sense of urgency to say we want to get back to these things. And I think we know that it's probably good for our mental health, like to re-engage in life, to do the things that we're passionate about. But yeah, I don't know, rather than pushing forward with everything, to say, okay, we are actually just going to stop and there isn't going to be this back and forth. I don't know if you have any insights or thoughts on that.
Well, we kind of alluded to this before, but this is a really tough situation. Usually administration adults like have an answer, but this is kind of unprecedented, at least in our time. So there is no guidebook. And so
for us,
I talk to administrators, at colleges frequently, and I know they are hurting and frustrated too, and really like want to give the students the best experience that they have, and that like is very difficult for them. So I'm sure students know this, but they don't make decisions like this lightly, and I think they are trying to do the best that they can with what they've got, right? And so kind of taking a step back, and like you're hurting, so sometimes your hurt gets in the way of understanding like other people are hurting too, and like it's not the situation that you want, but people are trying to make do the best with what they have.
I think everybody's trying to do the
right.
best that they can, and wanting to provide those opportunities, not just take it away, but it is very, very stressful.
Well, and it's okay for students to be disappointed. It's disappointing to practice all week and then suddenly not be able to play a game. Like that's super disappointing, and I think everybody kind of recognizing the hurt, that people are feeling, and giving people some space for that, I think is important too.
Cool.
Is there enough? I don't need to say anything. Is there enough
okay.
time?
Well, we have about 3 minutes, and I have a listener here reminding me that I said we were going to talk about sleep, and we haven't. So thank you for that. We do need to talk a little bit about sleep. So it kind of falls into this studying on the effects of the pandemic on college students. So we've already said, college is just a hard time to get good sleep, period. But right now, in a recent study that came out, 86% of participants indicated that they were experiencing disrupted sleep, and 38%, almost 40%, were saying that disruption was severe. So what can students do to address sleep issues? Things like insomnia, or maybe it's the other way, hypersomnia, where we're just like sleeping for really long periods of time but not getting good rest, or just poor quality sleep. What are your sleep tips?
I think like a routine at bedtime, so that you're signaling to your body that it's time to like shut down. And so like I like routines of like, I don't know, whatever your routine is going to be. They say like 20 to 30 minutes away, like before bed, put screens away. I don't know if that's possible for college students, because I know a lot of their lives are on screens. But, coming up with a routine that's relaxing, maybe it's, shutting computer down and doing something that you find relaxing, like watching a show to wind. I don't know, whatever it's going to be to wind down, and then like having like some type of a routine to let your body and mind know that it is time to shut down. And I think sleep hygiene is really important, like not working on your bed, and which gets hard in a dorm room.
Yeah, talk about sleep hygiene, because I think that at least when I've introduced that term to people, that's not always immediately familiar. They don't like sleep hygiene. Like, you mean I should take a shower before I go to bed? Well, maybe, but that's not really what it's about. Can you expand on that? Yeah.
So it's just doing things that are going to make your sleep easier for you. So shutting down screens can be part of it. I'm trying to remember my sheet. Can you guys help me out? Do you talk about sleep hygiene with your clients?
Go ahead.
Yeah, you go.
I think of when we're all at home all the time, where are you spending your time? And spending your time all day in bed, it's not super helpful for you when you're trying to then sleep. Your mind gets kind of confused during that. When you eating in bed or working in bed, doing homework, studying, that can get very confusing for your mind. So creating separate spaces as much as you can for that helps with better sleep.
And having a dark room and, a quiet place. And I know that gets really tricky in a dorm room. So like maybe you have a sound machine that you play, or you have certain music that signals to you. There's like bedtime stories for adults now, and like all kinds of things, tools that you can use. Or maybe you do a body scan. You listen to a body scan to help you. A body scan basically asks you to notice your breathing and then notice different parts of your body, like notice the sensations in your feet, and you kind of breathe into and out of your feet and then your legs. And so it helps you notice sensations, and it's relaxing. So maybe like incorporating that into like a bedtime routine.
Yeah. I am fascinated by the sleep stories that have come out. It's like I read stories to my kids at bedtime almost every night that I'm home, and that it helps them like calm down. And now there's adult bedtime stories. They call them sleep stories, not bedtime. But
I actually think you have a good voice for that. So
okay, well,
you should start another podcast.
start recording those. Yeah, maybe. I agree. The thing that I would add to that, and I know we're at 7:31, so we're going to finish up here pretty soon, but sometimes when we're focused on getting better sleep, we're almost like hyper-focused on sleep, but we're not focused on the other part of that circadian rhythm, which is being awake and alert. And so some of the things that we can do for ourselves is like when we get up in the morning, like open up the blinds, like get some natural light in. If we're up, even when the sun is still kind of low on the horizon, it doesn't have to be right when it's rising. I mean, it's great if you're up that early, but some people aren't. But even when the sun is still on the horizon, that light, our body responds to that, and everything starts turning on and like getting ready for alertness and awakeness. And that's the other part of the sleep cycle, that sometimes people that are having trouble sleeping are so fatigued during the day that their activity level is really low. Maybe they are in bed a lot, or they take naps or something like that. And we don't, there's some science behind naps too that we can talk about another time. But I think when it's day, when you're up and you're awake, be active. Like get some sunlight. Even in the Midwest, when it's cold and dark, like still be outside even for 5 to 10 minutes early in the morning to get that sunlight is really going to help set you up for the day, so that when the sun goes down and it's dark, then your body's going to respond to that as well and say, oh, now it is time for me to sleep. So just, I think, restoring some of that circadian rhythm, be active and alert during the day, and unwind at night, having some good rituals, routines, to help yourself fall asleep.
I think getting up too, like if you are having problems, like not laying in bed and letting that frustration mount, because the more you get frustrated with yourself, the less likely you are to sleep. So like getting up and reading a book, or doing something that doesn't ideally involve screens, so that you can relax and tell yourself, I may not get good sleep tonight, but that doesn't mean I can't tomorrow, or whatever.
And maybe this is a little, I don't know, like untherapeutic or something, but I'm actually okay. Like if somebody is waking up a lot during the night, like, okay, turn on Netflix, like pull that up on your phone or your TV or something, and then just watch something that you don't really care about. And like you kind of will start to get dozy while you're doing that, and then just turn it off and try and go back to sleep. But you're right, just kind of laying in bed, clock watching, tossing and turning, that's not helpful because you get more frustrated. So I'm like, yeah, I'd love it if you read a book, but I guess I don't have to, I'm not too confident that that's always going to happen. So I'm like, yeah, just turn on, an Office episode of The Office, and then, just fall asleep to that. The Office is kind of therapeutic anyway, I think. All right, you guys have been awesome tonight. I've really enjoyed this. There were more questions that we didn't quite get to. That's okay. It just means we should do this again in the future sometime. So appreciate all of your time and your expertise. I hope that it's been valuable for our audience. Again, I'm going to post this video. I'm going to be able to put that up on YouTube in the next few days, and then I'm also going to take the audio and publish that on the podcast platform. You can find that on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, really any platform that you like to listen to podcasts on. So this will be the new episode for the podcast on Monday next week. So we have the Bethany screenings coming up. What are the dates for those?
Monday, February 1st from 4 to 6, and then Tuesday, February 2nd from 12 to 2 at Bethany.
Yep. So if you're a Bethany student, please take advantage of that. If you're at a different college or institution, please check out the resources that are available for you to be able to check in on your mental health. All right. Thank you. And until next time, be well.